The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty training ground at Camp Pendleton as Sarah Martinez adjusted her medical kit for the third time. As a Navy corpsman attached to the Marine unit, she had learned to trust her instincts, and today something felt different. The air hung heavy with tension as the Marines prepared for what was supposed to be a routine combat simulation exercise. Sarah had been serving alongside these Marines for 8 months now, earning their respect through countless field exercises and medical emergencies. At 24, she was younger than many of the soldiers she treated, but her steady hands and calm demeanor under pressure had made her an invaluable member of the team. The Marines had nicknamed her Doc, a title of honor that she wore with pride. The exercise was designed to simulate a combat rescue scenario in urban warfare conditions. The training facility had been constructed to replicate a Middle Eastern village, complete with narrow alleyways, multi-story buildings, and hidden obstacles. Live ammunition wasn't used, but the smoke grenades, flashbangs, and realistic scenarios created an environment that closely mimicked actual combat conditions. Lance Corporal Jake Thompson, a 19-year-old from Ohio, was part of Sarah's assigned squad. He was known for his infectious laugh and his tendency to crack jokes even in the most serious situations. Despite his youth, Jake had proven himself to be a reliable Marine with quick reflexes and an unwavering commitment to his fellow soldiers. Sarah had treated him before for minor injuries during training, and they had developed the kind of professional camaraderie that forms between medical personnel and the troops they serve. As the exercise began, the squad moved through the simulated village with practiced precision. Radio chatter filled the air as different units coordinated their movements. Sarah stayed close to the action, ready to provide medical assistance if needed. The scenario called for the rescue of a wounded soldier from a building that had been booby-trapped with simulated explosives. The first sign of trouble came when Jake's voice crackled over the radio, reporting that he had spotted the target building. The structure was a 3-story concrete building designed to test the Marines' urban warfare skills. Unknown to the training supervisors, a fault in the building's construction had created a dangerous weakness in one of the upper floors. As Jake moved through the building, searching for the simulated casualty, the floor beneath him gave way without warning. The sound of cracking concrete and Jake's startled cry echoed through the radio. Sarah heard the commotion and immediately began moving toward the building, her medical training taking over as adrenaline surged through her system. When she reached the building, she could hear Jake calling for help from somewhere inside. The other Marines were trying to determine the safest way to reach him, but the structural damage made the building unstable. Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed additional medical supplies and headed into the building, following the sound of Jake's voice. She found him trapped under a heavy concrete beam on the second floor, conscious but clearly in pain. A quick assessment revealed that he had suffered injuries to his leg and possibly his ribs. The beam was too heavy for her to lift alone, but she knew that time was critical. Using her medical knowledge and improvised leverage techniques, she managed to free Jake from the debris. The real challenge now was getting him out of the building safely. Jake was unable to walk, and the structural damage made using stretcher bearers impossible. Sarah knew she would have to carry him herself, despite the fact that Jake outweighed her by nearly 50 pounds. Drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, she lifted Jake onto her back and began the treacherous journey out of the building. The journey down the damaged staircase felt like an eternity. Each step sent shockwaves of pain through Sarah's back and legs as she carried Jake's weight. Loose concrete and debris made the footing treacherous, and she had to navigate carefully around the twisted metal and broken beams that blocked their path. Jake, despite his injuries, tried to help by holding onto her shoulders and adjusting his position to make the load more manageable. "Doc, you need to put me down and get help," Jake whispered through gritted teeth as they reached the first-floor landing. Blood from his head wound had started to trickle down onto Sarah's uniform, and she could feel his grip weakening. "Not happening, Marine," Sarah replied firmly, her voice steady, despite the exhaustion that was beginning to set in. "We're getting out of here together." Her military training had taught her never to leave a wounded soldier behind, and her personal code wouldn't allow her to abandon someone who was counting on her. As they approached the ground floor, Sarah could hear the voices of the other Marines outside the building. The training exercise had been suspended, and emergency protocols were now in effect. Medical personnel and firefighters were being called to the scene, but Sarah knew that every minute counted when dealing with potential internal injuries. The final stretch to the exit seemed impossibly long. Sarah's legs were beginning to shake from the strain, and her breathing had become labored. Jake was fading in and out of consciousness, making him a dead weight that was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. But Sarah pressed on, driven by a determination that came from somewhere deep within her core. When they finally emerged from the building, the assembled Marines erupted in cheers and applause. Sarah had successfully evacuated Jake from the dangerous structure, but the physical toll was evident. Her face was pale, sweat poured down her forehead, and her entire body trembled from exhaustion. The medical team quickly took Jake from her arms and began administering first aid. As the adrenaline that had sustained her throughout the rescue began to fade, Sarah felt a strange sensation washing over her. The world around her started to blur, and she felt as though she was watching everything through a thick fog. She tried to take a step toward the medical team to assist with Jake's care, but her legs gave out beneath her. The combination of physical exhaustion, dehydration, and the massive adrenaline dump that followed the rescue had pushed her body beyond its limits. As she collapsed to the ground, the last thing she remembered was the concerned faces of her fellow Marines rushing toward her. The medical team immediately split their attention between Jake and Sarah. While Jake's injuries were serious but not life-threatening, Sarah's condition was more concerning. Her pulse was weak and rapid. Her blood pressure had dropped significantly and she was completely unresponsive. The medics quickly loaded both patients into ambulances and rushed them to the base hospital. At the hospital, doctors worked to stabilize both patients. Jake's injuries included a broken leg, several bruised ribs, and a concussion, but he was expected to make a full recovery. Sarah's condition was more complex. The extreme physical exertion, combined with dehydration and heat stress, had caused her body to shut down as a protective mechanism. Word of Sarah's heroic rescue spread quickly throughout the base. The story of the Navy corpsman who had risked her own life to save a Marine resonated deeply with everyone who heard it. In military culture, the bond between medical personnel and combat troops is sacred, and Sarah's actions embodied the very best of that tradition. For 3 days, Sarah remained unconscious in the intensive care unit. Her body was slowly recovering from the extreme physical trauma it had endured, but doctors weren't sure when she would wake up. Her parents had been flown in from Texas, and they maintained a constant vigil at her bedside, talking to her and holding her hand, hoping that their voices might somehow reach her. Jake, despite his own injuries, had insisted on being moved to a room as close to Sarah's as possible. Still confined to a wheelchair with his leg in a cast, he spent hours sitting outside her room, telling anyone who would listen about how she had saved his life. The guilt he felt about her condition was overwhelming, even though everyone assured him that what happened wasn't his fault. The story of Sarah's rescue had spread far beyond Camp Pendleton. Military news networks picked up the story, and soon it was being shared across social media platforms. The image of a small Navy corpsman carrying a wounded Marine to safety had captured the attention of people around the world. Letters and cards began arriving at the hospital from strangers who had been moved by her story. On the third day, as Sarah's parents sat quietly reading to her, they noticed her eyelids beginning to flutter. Her mother immediately called for the nurses, and within minutes the room was filled with medical staff monitoring her vital signs. Slowly, Sarah's eyes opened and she looked around the room with confusion. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from days of inactivity. Her mother burst into tears and grabbed her hand, while her father struggled to find the words to explain everything that had happened. "You're in the hospital, sweetheart," her mother said softly. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. Do you remember what happened during the training exercise?" Sarah's memory was fuzzy at first, but gradually the events began to come back to her. She remembered finding Jake trapped under the beam, carrying him out of the building, and then everything going black. Her first concern was for Jake's well-being. "Is Jake okay?" she asked urgently, trying to sit up despite the protest from the medical staff. "Did he make it? Are his injuries serious?" The doctors assured her that Jake was recovering well and that his injuries, while significant, would heal completely. They explained that her actions had likely saved his life, as the building had continued to deteriorate after they escaped, and a rescue might not have been possible if she had waited for additional help. As Sarah's condition stabilized over the next few days, She began to learn about the impact her story had made. Nurses told her about the thousands of messages that had poured in from around the world. Military personnel from different branches of service had reached out to express their admiration for her courage and dedication, but perhaps the most meaningful response came from within her own military community. Word had spread throughout the Marine Corps about the Navy corpsmen who had embodied the military values of courage, honor, and commitment. Marines from bases across the country had heard the story and wanted to find a way to honor her sacrifice. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the commanding officer at Camp Pendleton, had been deeply moved by Sarah's actions. She had served in combat zones herself and understood the significance of what Sarah had done. The bond between Marines and their corpsmen was something sacred in military culture, and Sarah's actions represented the very best of that relationship. Colonel Hayes began reaching out to other Marine units to organize something special for Sarah's recovery. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Marines from bases across California expressed interest in participating in a tribute that would properly honor Sarah's heroism and sacrifice. The plan that Colonel Hayes and her staff developed was unprecedented in scope and scale. They wanted to organize a formal ceremony that would not only honor Sarah's heroism, but also demonstrate the profound respect that the Marine Corps had for the Navy corpsmen who served alongside them. The ceremony would need to be something truly special, something that would properly convey the depth of gratitude that the Marines felt. Word of the planned ceremony spread through Marine Corps social networks with remarkable speed. Marines who had never met Sarah personally felt compelled to participate because her story represented everything they believed in about military service and sacrifice. The concept of leaving no one behind wasn't just a motto to them. It was a sacred principle that Sarah had embodied in the most dramatic way possible. From Camp Pendleton, the word spread to nearby Marine bases including 29 Palms and Miramar. But the response went far beyond California. Marines stationed at bases across the country began making arrangements to travel to California to participate in the ceremony. Some used personal leave time. Others coordinated with their commanding officers to participate as official representatives of their units. The logistics of organizing such a large-scale event were complex, but the Marine Corps pulled together with the kind of efficiency that they were known for. Transportation was arranged for Marines traveling from distant bases, and local facilities were prepared to accommodate the hundreds of participants who were expected to attend. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her recovery in the hospital, largely unaware of the massive tribute being planned in her honor. She was focused on her physical therapy and getting back to full strength so she could return to duty. The doctors were amazed by her determination and positive attitude throughout the recovery process. Jake had become a regular visitor to Sarah's room, and their friendship had deepened through the shared experience of the accident and recovery. He felt a profound sense of gratitude toward her that went beyond simple thankfulness. In his mind, she had given him a second chance at life, and he was determined to make the most of it. "Doc, I keep thinking about what you did," Jake said during one of his visits. "You didn't hesitate for even a second. When everyone else was trying to figure out the safest way to get to me, you just went in and did what needed to be done." Sarah was uncomfortable with the praise and attention. In her mind, she had simply done her job. Military medical personnel were trained to provide care under difficult circumstances, and she didn't see her actions as anything extraordinary. "Any corpsman would have done the same thing," she replied modestly. "That's what we're trained for. We don't leave people behind." But Jake shook his head. "No, Doc, what you did was special. I've been talking to the other Marines, and they all feel the same way. You represent everything that's good about the military." As Sarah's physical condition improved, the doctors began discussing her discharge from the hospital. She was eager to return to duty and resume her normal responsibilities, but the medical staff wanted to ensure that she was completely recovered before clearing her for active service. Colonel Hayes visited Sarah several times during her recovery, and during one of these visits she mentioned that the Marine Corps was planning a small ceremony to recognize her actions. Sarah was told that it would be a simple affair with her unit and some base personnel, nothing elaborate or overwhelming. What Sarah didn't know was that the small ceremony had grown into something much larger. Marines from across the country were making final preparations to travel to Camp Pendleton. The ceremony had taken on a life of its own, becoming a symbol of the values and brotherhood that define the Marine Corps culture. The planning committee had decided that the ceremony would take place on the parade ground at Camp Pendleton, the same location where Sarah had been conducting training exercises when the accident occurred. The symbolism was important. It would represent her return to duty and her triumph over the adversity she had faced. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze rustling the flags that had been positioned around the parade ground. Sarah had been told to report to the base administration building for what she believed would be a small recognition ceremony. She had chosen to wear her dress blue uniform, the same uniform she had worn when she first reported to Camp Pendleton months earlier. As she walked toward the administration building, Sarah noticed an unusual amount of activity on the base. There seemed to be more vehicles than normal in the parking areas, and she could see groups of Marines in dress uniforms moving in the same direction she was heading. She assumed there might be multiple ceremonies taking place that day. Colonel Hayes met her at the administration building and walked with her toward the parade ground. "Sarah, I want you to know how proud we all are of what you did," the colonel said as they walked. "Your actions represented the very best of military service, and we wanted to make sure you understood how much it means to everyone." As they approached the parade ground, Sarah could hear the sound of many voices and the shuffle of feet moving into formation. When they rounded the corner of the building, Sarah stopped in her tracks, unable to believe what she was seeing. The parade ground was filled with Marines in dress blue uniforms, standing in perfect formation. Row after row of Marines stretched across the field, their brass buttons and insignia gleaming in the morning sun. Sarah estimated that there had to be at least 500 Marines present, far more than the small ceremony she had been expecting. "Colonel, what is this?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The sight of so many Marines assembled in her honor was overwhelming, and she felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. "This is the Marine Corps saying thank you," Colonel Hayes replied. "These Marines have come from bases across the country to honor what you did. They represent thousands more who couldn't be here but wanted to show their respect." As Sarah was escorted to the front of the formation, she could see the faces of the Marines who had assembled. Some were young, barely out of boot camp, while others were seasoned veterans with multiple deployments under their belts. But they all shared the same expression of respect and admiration. The ceremony began with the presentation of colors and the playing of the national anthem. As the flag was raised and the music played, Sarah felt a profound sense of emotion wash over her. She had served her country with pride, but she had never expected this kind of recognition. Colonel Hayes stepped forward to address the assembled Marines and the small group of family members and dignitaries who had been invited to attend. "We are here today to honor Hospital Corpsman Second Class Sarah Martinez, whose actions during a training exercise exemplified the highest traditions of military service," she began. The colonel recounted the events of that day, describing how Sarah had risked her own life to save a fellow service member. She spoke about the bond between Marines and their corpsmen, and how Sarah's actions had strengthened that bond for everyone present. Corpsman Martinez didn't hesitate when she heard that a Marine was in danger. Colonel Hayes continued. "She entered an unstable building, freed Lance Corporal Thompson from debris, and carried him to safety despite the personal risk. Her actions likely saved his life, and she collapsed from exhaustion only after ensuring his safety." Jake Thompson, who had been given permission to attend the ceremony despite still being on limited duty, was called forward to present Sarah with a special recognition. Walking with the aid of crutches, he made his way to where Sarah was standing. "Doc," Jake said, his voice carrying across the silent parade ground, "I can never repay what you did for me that day. You gave me my life back, and I promise you that I'll make it count." He handed her a small box containing a specially commissioned coin that had been created to commemorate her heroism. But the most powerful moment of the ceremony came when Colonel Hayes called for the assembled Marines to render honors. In perfect unison, 500 Marines saluted Sarah, holding their salutes for a full minute in complete silence. The sight of so many service members paying tribute was almost too much for Sarah to process. As the ceremony concluded and the Marines began to break formation, many of them approached Sarah individually to shake her hand and express their personal gratitude. Each interaction was brief but meaningful, with Marines sharing their own stories of corpsmen who had made a difference in their lives or expressing their appreciation for her service. One grizzled sergeant major, with ribbons covering his chest indicating multiple combat deployments, waited patiently in line to speak with her. When his turn came, he simply said, "Ma'am, in 30 years of service, I've seen a lot of brave things. What you did ranks right up there with the best of them." His words carried the weight of experience and meant more to Sarah than any formal decoration could have. The impact of the ceremony extended far beyond that single day. Video footage of the event was shared widely on social media and military news outlets, inspiring people around the world. The image of 500 Marines saluting one Navy corpsman became a symbol of military unity and the values that service members hold dear. For Sarah, the ceremony marked a turning point in her military career. She returned to full duty with a renewed sense of purpose and an even deeper understanding of the responsibility that came with being a military medical professional. The experience had taught her that sometimes ordinary people are called upon to do extraordinary things, and that the bonds formed in military service can transcend individual branches and specialties. Jake Thompson made a full recovery and returned to active duty. The experience had changed him as well, giving him a profound appreciation for life and service. He frequently spoke to new Marines about the importance of the corpsmen who served alongside them, using Sarah's story as an example of the dedication and sacrifice that medical personnel brought to their mission. The relationship between Sarah and Jake evolved into a lasting friendship, built on mutual respect and shared experience. They stayed in touch throughout their military careers, and Jake never missed an opportunity to tell others about the corpsman who had saved his life. Colonel Hayes submitted Sarah for several formal decorations recognizing her heroism, including the Navy Achievement Medal with Combat VI device. But for Sarah, the most meaningful recognition remained the ceremony where 500 Marines had honored her service. It represented the acceptance and appreciation of the community she had chosen to serve. Years later, after both Sarah and Jake had completed their military service, they would often reflect on the events of that day and the ceremony that followed. Sarah went on to become a registered nurse, continuing her commitment to helping others in civilian life. Jake pursued a career in education, becoming a high school teacher who used his military experience to mentor young people. The story of Sarah's rescue and the tribute that followed became part of the oral tradition at Camp Pendleton, passed down to new Marines as an example of the values they were expected to uphold. Training instructors would tell the story to new corpsmen, emphasizing the sacred trust that existed between medical personnel and the Marines they served. The ceremony had demonstrated something important about military culture and the bonds that exist between service members. It showed that heroism could emerge from the most ordinary circumstances, and that when someone embodied the highest ideals of military service, the entire community would come together to recognize and honor that sacrifice. For the 500 Marines who participated in the ceremony, it was an honor to pay tribute to someone who had demonstrated such courage and dedication. They returned to their home bases with a renewed appreciation for the corpsmen who served alongside them and a deeper understanding of what it meant to leave no one behind. The legacy of that day lived on in the countless small acts of service and sacrifice that followed, as Marines and corpsmen alike were inspired by Sarah's example to give their best in service to others and to their country.